So over these past few weeks in particular, I've been thinking a lot about purpose, about the purpose of our lives. And part of that, I'm quite sure, is the fact that all three of our daughters, Julie and I's daughters, all three of our daughters are graduating from something as this school year comes to a close. So I have a daughter who's graduating with her bachelor's degree. I have a daughter who's finishing up an associate's degree that she'll continue on at a different school to complete her bachelor's degree. We have our youngest, Olivia, who leads worship here on a regular basis. She finished high school. And so we have all of these graduations and life stuff happening. And while we're just so proud, but in these moments, talk about purpose. And in those quiet moments, those moments where we think about our kids, we think about life, it's like, have I done enough to prepare my kids to take hold of the purpose that God has created them for? Have I done enough to help them take hold of in every possible way the purpose that God has placed them on this earth for? And it's not just my kids. We have students all over the place in this church. Some of you, it's your kids that keep me up at night. Our college students, we have such an incredible privilege of walking with you through some really important years in your life, and we are so grateful for that opportunity. So grateful that you call Countryside home while you're in college, and yet we feel the weight of it. It's like, have we done enough to prepare you to live your life in the purpose that God has created you for? I look in the mirror, and every day it seems like there's more gray in the beard. Am I fully accomplishing everything that God has created me for? Am I fully embracing the purpose that God has placed on my life? Have I done enough? Am I doing enough in light of the purpose that God has created me for? I look around, and the reality is, y'all aren't getting any younger either. So it's good for us to wrestle with some big questions. Like what is God's purpose for our lives? Questions like, how do we know we're getting it right? Spring 2020. Does anybody remember what was happening in the world in spring 2020? Actually, as winter was giving way to spring in the year of 2020. Or have we all just sort of blotted that out from our memories? We don't even want to think about that. We don't want to remember that. Well, I remember it. And I remember we were living in Alaska at that point, and there were starting to be some news stories that were bouncing around. And it was stories of this illness that seemed to not have a cure, a known way to respond to it. And it was in other parts of the world, but it was just inevitable. With the way travel is, it's like eventually it's coming to the United States. We were living in Alaska at that point, so there was unique challenges related to the isolation that we felt in that particular state. So I remember seeing the news stories just starting to emerge just a little bit, like something is happening. And then I remember we were in the lower 48 and traveling back to Alaska, and I was in an airport, and I saw for the first time people walking, and they were masked up as they were walking through the airport, and it was like, there is something bigger than what I realized was happening. There's something going on. And so a whole lot of the rest of it I've blotted out, but there's one other moment that I remember. Because as I was processing this, and I'm seeing the news stories, and I'm seeing the beginnings of something that's much more significant than maybe what we initially thought it was going to turn into culturally. Watching all of this happen, and I remember praying, God, would you give me wisdom to navigate whatever it is that's coming? I don't know the way this is all going to play out. I know what the projections look like. I know we have no concept really for what was about to happen. So I'm praying over this. I'm praying over the church I was leading at that point. I'm praying over the situations that are all related to all of this. And as I'm praying over this, I received this clear, God's speaking to me. He said, get close. Stay close, no matter what, right? Get close, stay close, no matter what. And so that statement became a mantra as we navigated the various challenges that came our way. As I'm leading a church, and COVID wasn't fun for anybody, but it was really, really not a lot of fun to lead through. As I navigated all of that, realized that God was preparing me. He was calling me to himself. Calling me to get close, stay close, no matter what. And so as we experienced all the the things that were happening culturally around all of that, as I experienced the feelings of deep loneliness as we felt isolated throughout the process, as I watched as a world and of people who I care about deeply, it just seemed like the whole thing was just coming apart at the seams. And I don't just mean that it was coming apart at the seams like globally. I mean relationships with people I care deeply about, personal relationships within the life of the church. It's like everything just seemed like it was coming apart at the seams. Get close, stay close, no matter what. The disciples had a conversation like that with Jesus. Actually, it was a conversation right before the events that would lead Jesus to the cross. Jesus has his closest followers, his disciples, huddled up around him, and he's preparing them for what's to come. And even at that point, they didn't know fully what was happening. I think they knew at that point that there was something significant, that there was a big move that was about to happen, a big event that was going to be a history-changing moment, a defining moment within the world. And with all of that happening, it's likely they were probably making some plans in their own minds. Like, there's a big mission in front of us. There's a defining moment that we're staring down. Like, how are we going to navigate it? What do we need to do to be ready for it? How can we make sure that we're ready for whatever comes our way? And it's like with all of that swirling around, because they're human beings like we are, we would be making those same sorts of processing. Actually, some of you this morning might have like a whole separate track. You're listening to a sermon, but you're working a problem. There's something that's rolling, you're thinking through, you're making plans about. The disciples are like us. So it's with all of that happening that Jesus huddles them up, with all of that was swirling around them, with all that was yet to happen that they weren't even fully aware of yet was about to happen. It was all swirling around them. And in that, Jesus speaks a promise. John 15, starting at verse 1. Jesus says this, I'm the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. It's the start of a conversation. So they're huddled up with all kinds of chaos swirling around them. Jesus promised purpose, a meaningful and fruitful life. But isn't it interesting that we can hear Jesus make a beautiful promise like this, and yet somehow we can move from promise to discouragement, from promise to fear. We hear Jesus teaching his disciples, and we start almost immediately jumping to our own conclusions. Like Jesus is talking about bearing fruit. I have to make myself fruitful. Like, how do I do that? Am I doing enough of it? Am I fruitful enough? Have I done what's required of me? The problem is fruitful isn't something that we make happen. As Jesus says it's what happens when we abide in him. But we jump to that, I have to make myself fruitful. We maybe even start to fear the vine dresser, the one who's doing that pruning and cutting works, because we hear cutting and throwing away, and it's like everything else just falls into the background, and it resonates with everything that we fear about God. And yet there is something more to it than that. There is purpose and there is intention in the work of the vine dresser. But as we hear it laid out, all we hear is pain and loss. Some of us are walking through seasons where we're being pruned. We're walking through seasons where we feel the work of the vine dresser in our lives. And it's like, God, would you just tell me what it is that you're trying to do so I can understand? I'll let go of it. Like, this pruning process is painful. And it feels like loss. And so we start to fear the vine dresser. And when we try and make ourselves fruitful and we're afraid of the vine dresser, it leads to a lack of abiding. Like, how do we abide when all of that is swirling around, when our approach to life is being exposed so completely? Because probably what's happening is that what's being exposed is an approach to our relationship with Jesus where we have plans and we have purposes and we have fruit that we would like to see happen in our lives, and we're inviting Jesus into our plans, inviting Jesus into our purposes, inviting Jesus to step into our lives and make us fruitful in the way that we've decided we want to be fruitful. Asking him to abide in our purposes and plans instead of living our lives rooted in him. And that will never work. And when it doesn't work, we live in fear of God. Like, here comes the vine dresser. What's he going to cut from my life next? Or we live an unsettled life, constantly looking for something to give us purpose and meaning. And when it doesn't, when it inevitably fails, we go looking for the next thing, or the next relationship, or the next set of circumstances, or the next place. And we just keep chasing after fruitfulness. Jesus is teaching us the discipline of abiding, of living a life of patience and endurance and connection. And he's making a promise. And as he's making this promise, he's making a promise that requires us to make a choice about how we're going to live our lives. And then along the way, as he's making this promise and he's inviting us to make a choice about that promise, he's actually defining the purpose of our lives. So with all that in mind, let's listen again to his promise. John 15, verse 1, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Jesus says, I am the true vine. And there is no shortage in our lives and in our world of counterfeits to the vine. Right? No shortage of counterfeit claims about providing for us or giving us the kind of fruit that we're chasing after. There's no shortage of counterfeits that claim to be the vine or look like a vine, or that we, by the way we choose to operate with them, we let function as the vine in our lives. So Jesus cuts through all of that and says, there is a true vine. I am the true vine. And he says, and my Father is the vine dresser, which is helpful for us because many times we think of like God's judgment and God's like work in our lives as some sort of future event. Like God will at some point, and we will stand before God and we will give account for the way we've lived our lives, but it's not just this in the future work that God does. Jesus says it's an ongoing and defining activity of the Father. Maybe not judgment exactly like we think about it, but it's him skillfully helping us to grow into who he knows we can be, who he created us to be. Like we live in fear of God's judgment, of God's discernment in our lives, of God making like decisions about our lives. And yet when he does, it's a good work. We should be celebrating the work of the vine dresser in our lives because it's a beautiful thought. God at work in our lives, helping us to be fruitful. God at work in our lives, cutting out the stuff that doesn't belong in our lives so that we can bear more fruit, that our lives can look more and more and more like what he created us to be. And it's beautiful until we see the vine dresser coming our way carrying the saw, right? And then it's like, oh, no, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute, this is gonna feel like loss. And I have to be afraid of this. What's this going to lead to? And how long is it gonna take? And how long is it gonna take for me to recover from this work that you're doing in my life, God? And so there's some things for us to keep in mind when we're being pruned, is that there are actually only two kinds of branches as Jesus describes it, the ones that bear fruit and the ones that don't. Both kinds of branches get cut. One gets cut, one gets pruned. So just because you feel like you're being cut, it doesn't mean that you're being cut off. It's true that God cuts off the unfruitful branches, but he also prunes branches that are bearing fruit so that they can bear more fruit, to make room for more fruit on that branch. There's the hard truth of the cutting work that God does. There's the hard part as we participate in it of the pruning work that God does, but it's always purposeful. It's always worth it. Even if it doesn't feel worth it in the time, even if it's more painful than we think we can bear, eventually, as the fruit begins to form where there was pruning work that was done, the pruning work is worth it. But also remembering that fruit isn't activity. Like have I done enough? I have conversations all the time with people, with you all, and it's like conversations about how do I know I've done enough? How do I know I've accomplished the things that God has asked me to do? Have I done enough for God to be pleased with the way I'm living my life? Fruit isn't activity, it's a changed nature. And as Paul writes to the Galatian church in chapter 5 of Galatians, he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And so for us to know, have I done enough? Am I doing the things? Do I have the kind of fruit that God is looking for in my life? It's actually not a quantity question as much as it's what kind of fruit is your life bearing? It's not, have I done enough? Have I accomplished enough? Have I impressed God with all of the activity that I've done? Am I growing in joy? Am I growing in love? Am I growing in peace and forbearance and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness? Am I more self-controlled now than I was before? Because that's the fruit that God works in our lives. That's the fruit that God, that when we abide in him, that he accomplishes in us. It's what he does the work to allow to grow in us. And so if we have this clear picture of what the fruit looks like, it's much easier for us to address the counterfeit offers of vines that show up along the way. Because if we don't know what the fruit is that we're looking for, or if we have our own picture of it, whether that's like wealth or some other kind of outcome, there will never be a shortage of offers of a vine. But Jesus says if we chase after the fruit that is of the Spirit, there's only one way to get to that. Jesus continues. He says, already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. Jesus says, already you are clean. Jesus has done his part. And so our abiding and our life lived in relationship with him, us trusting him with our lives and with the purpose of our lives, it's all in response to work that God has already done for us. So this is all about what happens next. Because I think Jesus is perceiving this tendency that we have as human beings to keep going back to certain milestone moments and saying, I just need to be cleansed again. Because of the confidence that brings, the milestone that brings. Because sometimes it's easier to go back to a milestone than it is to move forward into new territory. Like when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, and as that process started, this happens just a few chapters before this conversation, he's washing the disciples' feet, and Peter says, Jesus, I can't let you do that. That's so beneath you. I'm so utterly unworthy of you doing this. And then Jesus explains to him the purpose of what he's doing and why he's doing it. And Peter changes and says, actually, Jesus, if you're doing that, then my whole body, my head, everything, I want to be cleansed in every way like what you're describing. And Jesus says, it's like clean is clean. You don't have to keep washing. I have already done this work. Jesus is making it clear that we don't need to go back searching and striving for what we already have in him. How much of our lives is spent chasing after what has already been given to us through Jesus? How much of our lives is spent running after and looking for from someone else or something else what has already been given to us through Jesus Christ? And Jesus says, abide. Abide in me. And that's a good word. It points to the confidence that we can have in our relationship with Jesus. It's the get close, stay close, no matter what. See, I've chosen to abide in Jesus. No matter what other circumstances are swirling around my life, no matter what else is happening around me, I will abide in him. Because to abide in Jesus and for him to abide in you means that you don't have to keep worrying about where you stand with him. Because you stand in him. Which is good news, because the branch can't bear fruit by itself. That there's no capacity for a branch that has severed from the vine. And this is Jesus talking, not just that God has cut off a branch, but this is that decision that we make to say, I'm going to try and bear fruit for myself, by myself. Jesus painting his powerful picture, this branch cut off from the vine, trying to prove itself by bearing fruit. All the work and the striving and the frustration that grows from that reality versus the joy and the peace that come with abiding, and then the fruit that God works in our life that grows naturally out of that. And here's the thing, even if we could, Even if the branch could somehow muster some fruit, it's never going to earn its way back in a connection with the vine. That's not how it works. Jesus says, abide in me. Stay close, stay faithful, trust the process, live in the promise. And that sounds deceptively simple, right? To have that kind of conversation in a place like this where we can have this conversation without all of the chaos of the world immediately around us, without the things that we experience as we go from this room into the places where God has called us to live it out faithfully. It sounds simple here. We've got to figure out how to live this, not just here, but when we go from this place. And so Jesus knows this. And it's like 2,000 years ago, Jesus knew it so well that he said it again. Verse 5, I'm the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. Jesus pulling all of it together and saying, so don't forget this. Guys, you're gonna need to hold on to this as you go from this place, as you go from this conversation into a world where there's violence and chaos and fear and darkness and offers of counterfeit vines and all kinds of things coming your way. You need to remember the purpose of your life. And so it's not a choice between bearing fruit or not bearing fruit. It's a choice that we make between abiding and not abiding. And then from that, fruit or no fruit. Fruit is the outcome. Jesus says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this, my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. What a beautiful picture. What a beautiful, beautiful, deeper kind of life that Jesus is offering to us. The question is, will we accept what he's offering to us, or will we continue to chase after the stuff that we've decided is important for ourselves? Because when we hear Jesus describe the outcome, if we actually paused and listened to the words that Jesus spoke as he promised what life looks like, not just the choice that we have to make, sometimes the painful decisions we have to make as we let other stuff go, but the actual outcome of living our lives, abiding in him. Why would we choose anything else? He says, ask whatever you wish. And he says, by this, he's talking about your life, by this, my Father is glorified. And you'll bear much fruit. And you'll show yourselves to be my disciples. Jesus preparing his followers for some really difficult moments that were ahead of them, some difficult challenges and a big mission and all kinds of circumstances where they were going to have to hold on closely to him as they navigated all of this. And there's such intentionality in this order because it could be as he sent them out from this place where they could start to think, what am I going to accomplish for God? Talks about bearing fruit and proving themselves to be disciples, or bearing witness about their discipleship as the last part of this. It's the outcome. It starts actually with transformed desires, abiding in him, and then our prayers are reflective of that abiding, and then living a life that points to the glory of God. And that's purpose. Right? That's not just how do we navigate difficult circumstances. That is purpose for our lives. Loving God, being loved by God, glorifying God as we bear fruit and as we bear witness, living a life of purpose, abiding in Jesus. Jesus promised purpose, and Jesus keeps his promise. So that promise is an invitation. First, to trust the vine. To live an abiding life, to not look to get from anyone or anything what you've already been given through Jesus Christ, to pay attention to what it is we're chasing after, to pay attention to what it is that we're abiding in and the hopes that we have for that and the fruit that we hope will come from that, to say, of all the other options, none of that will get me the purpose that God has for me. None of those other options in my life will bear the kind of fruit that abiding in Jesus will bear. To trust the vine, to actually trust the vine so much that I'm willing to let go of every other option, to call the counterfeits, and to lay aside everything else that I might be tempted to abide in so that I can bear the fruit and live the life of purpose that God created me for. To trust the vine like that, and you can trust the vine. Because here's the thing, what Jesus calls us to, the work that he places in front of us, the fruitfulness that he calls us to have in our lives, all of it he will accomplish through us. It's not us impressing God with our work and impressing God with the things that we do. What Jesus calls us to, he will accomplish through us. That's the vine at work, bearing fruit through the branches when we abide in him. So trust the vine. Trust the vine dresser. This is us learning along the way and trusting the difference between cutting and pruning. Right? Not everything that God does is cutting us off. Not every work that God does is giving up on us. Right? This God does pruning work in us, and we go through seasons of life where God is working on us. And here's the beautiful thing. If God is working on you, he has not given up on you. Right? There might be a lot of pruning. There might be a lot of work going on in your life. God might be very busy because there's all kinds of stuff that needs to be pruned from your life. But the good news is if God is doing that kind of work, he hasn't given up on you. He's still working to fulfill his purposes in your life. You can trust the vine dresser. He has not given up on us. Actually, it's the opposite. The vine dresser's goal is always fruitfulness. It can be painful, but it's purposeful. Trust the vine dresser. Trust the vine. Trust the vine dresser. Trust the process. Bearing fruit is actually not our work. Bearing fruit is the work of the vine and the vine dresser, as Jesus tells the story. He says, actually, branches, you are part of the story, but you're not the one that actually creates the fruit in your life. The vine at work, the vine dresser at work leads to fruitfulness in your life. And it's such a helpful and healthy picture of our spiritual journey. The vine dresser, and the branch. The vine holding it all together. The vine providing the nutrients necessary for fruitfulness. The vine dresser lovingly and skillfully and decisively doing the cutting and pruning work to maximize fruitfulness in our lives. And then the branch, who, remember, Jesus says, you are the branch. The branch simply abides. The branch stays close. The branch chooses to stay rooted, abiding and allowing the vine and the vine dresser to do their work in and through our lives. Trust the vine. Trust the vine dresser. Trust the process. And live in the promise. We all have things that we're concerned about. We all have situations in our lives that we're working the problem as we're navigating the rest of our lives. We're sitting in this room and there's things that we're thinking about, things we're concerned about, fears that we have, concerns about whether we've done enough or not done enough, or have we made the right choices? Have we invested in our kids in the way that we needed to? All of those things. We take all of that and we say Jesus has made a promise about purpose for our lives. We take all of the fears, all of the concerns, all the things that are discouraging to us along the way, our hopes and our dreams and all of it. We take all of that and we look at it through the promise. And we abide. Whatever comes, whatever situations we find ourselves in, whatever shakes us and leaves us shaken, I will abide. I will abide. I will abide. When we're faced with choices along the way, when there's decisions about whether we should do this or this other thing, we look and we say, I'm going to make this choice based on one big question. Which of these choices, when I choose it, leads me closer and closer and closer to abiding in Jesus? Which of these options is the abiding in Christ option? And here's the thing, no matter how good or how much work we can do to make ourselves convinced that the other option is going to be a workable solution for us, if it doesn't lead us to abiding in Christ, it is not God's purpose for us, and we have to let it go. So we operate living in the promise. It means the stuff that we're afraid of, we look and understand it through the promise. The choices that we make in life, we make those choices saying, I just want to make sure I'm abiding in the life that Jesus has called me to live in. Trust Jesus to keep his promise and abide. Get close. Stay close. Know matter what.